My name is Madeline. I am 33 years old, and exactly 5 days after giving birth to my son, I stood on my own front porch, only to find my key would not turn the lock. The door swung open, but it was not my husband standing there. A strange woman glared at me, demanding to know why I was loitering outside the house she had just bought that very morning. My husband had taken everything and run off with his mistress. I ended up selling my wedding ring just to buy a bus ticket home, and at that station, I used my last $50 to help a stranded older man. 2 weeks later, a bulletproof black limousine pulled up outside my toxic parents' house, and the driver called my name. He handed me the exact weapon I needed to financially obliterate every single person who had betrayed me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to rebuild your life from absolute zero and make your enemies pay. The afternoon sun beat down on my exhausted body as I shifted my 5-day-old baby Leo against my chest. My C-section scar burned with every breath I took. I had just been discharged from the hospital, expecting my husband Trevor to pick me up. Instead, he had sent a brief message saying he had an emergency meeting at his tech firm and told me to take a cab home. I lugged my heavy hospital bag up the steps of the Craftsman house I had purchased with my own savings 4 years ago. I slid my key into the brass deadbolt, but it refused to catch. I tried again, my hands trembling from postpartum fatigue. The lock had been changed. Before I could knock, the heavy oak door swung open. A blonde woman in workout clothes stood in the foyer holding a moving box. She scowled at me, her eyes darting from my pale face to the sleeping newborn in my arms. "Who are you?" she snapped. "You need to step off the porch. The movers are bringing in the heavy furniture in 10 minutes, and we just closed on this house a few hours ago. I do not want any liability if you trip." I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the words. I told her there had to be some mistake, that this was my house, my address. I recited the street number, panic rising in my throat. She crossed her arms. "Not anymore. Trevor handed over the final keys at the title office at 9 this morning. Now please leave before I call the police." She slammed the door in my face, the sharp crack of the wood echoing in the quiet suburban neighborhood. My knees buckled. I stumbled backward, clutching Leo tightly to my chest, and practically collapsed onto the concrete curb next to my rolling suitcase. My breathing turned shallow and erratic. I pulled my phone from my pocket with shaking, clammy fingers. There was an unread text message from Trevor. I opened it, and the words on the screen felt like a physical knife twisting into my gut. "House is sold," the text read. "Forging your signature on the power of attorney was almost too easy. Amber and I are boarding a flight to Miami. Have fun with your boring spreadsheets, you lifeless calculator. Do not bother trying to call." A high-pitched ringing filled my ears. Amber was his junior marketing assistant. I had suspected something was wrong months ago, but Trevor had convinced me I was just being a paranoid, hormonal pregnant woman. He had gaslit me while I was carrying his child, all while meticulously plotting to strip me of my assets. I am a financial forensic analyst. My entire career is built on investigating hidden money, uncovering corporate fraud, and tracing illicit funds for high-profile clients. I hunted down missing millions for a living. Yet I had been so utterly consumed by a difficult pregnancy and the grueling demands of my firm that I had completely missed the massive, catastrophic theft happening inside my own home. The irony was suffocating. I immediately opened my banking app, praying my emergency fund was still intact. Face ID unlocked the screen, and my heart completely stopped. The joint checking account showed a balance of 0. My personal savings account, which I had rigorously protected, was flagged with a red banner. I tapped the alert. "Account frozen due to unauthorized wire transfer disputes." He had drained it all. Every single dollar I had earned, saved, and set aside for Leo was gone. I tried to pull up my credit card app to book a hotel room. Declined. Account closed by primary card holder. Trevor had systematically severed every financial lifeline I possessed while I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from major surgery. A loud diesel engine roared to life, pulling my attention away from the glowing screen. A heavy-duty pickup truck jumped the curb and parked aggressively close to my suitcase. A burly contractor stepped out, adjusting his tool belt. He walked right up to me, barely glancing at my crying newborn. "Lady, you need to move your bags," he grunted. "I have a demolition crew coming in 5 minutes to tear down this entire front porch." The new owners want a modern deck. I looked at the porch. I had paid a premium for that custom woodwork just 2 summers ago. I had spent countless evenings sitting on those steps, envisioning a future where my child would learn to walk on that very wood. Now a stranger was about to rip it apart, and I was being ordered to get out of the way. I have nowhere to go, I whispered, my voice cracking under the immense weight of the betrayal. The contractor simply shrugged, pulling a crowbar from his truck. Not my problem. You have 2 minutes before the sledgehammers come out. I sat there on the hard concrete, the cold wind biting through my thin hospital clothes. Leo began to wail, a hungry, desperate sound that pierced right through my soul. I had no money, no home, and a hungry baby. My analytical brain, usually so sharp and calculated, was completely paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of the situation. I looked down at my hands. The only item of value I had left in the entire world was the diamond wedding ring sitting on my left ring finger, the symbol of a promise that had just destroyed my life. I knew exactly what I had to do next, and it was going to require stepping into a nightmare I was completely unprepared for. I grabbed the plastic handle of my suitcase and turned my back on the house I had paid for. Every step sent a jolt of fire through my surgical incision, a brutal reminder that my body was still recovering from bringing a life into this world. I shifted Leo higher on my chest, shielding his tiny face from the harsh afternoon wind. The suburban sidewalks, usually so picturesque and welcoming, now felt like a gauntlet. I walked for 2 miles toward the commercial district, my vision blurring from sheer exhaustion and the physical agony radiating from my abdomen. But I did not stop. I could not stop. Survival had stripped away my grief, leaving only a cold mechanical drive to protect my son. The bell above the door of the pawn shop chimed with a dull metallic thud. The air inside smelled of stale cigarette smoke, dust, and desperation. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow over glass display cases, filled with tarnished watches, power tools, and unredeemed jewelry. Behind the reinforced safety glass stood the owner, a heavy-set man with a greasy comb-over and eyes that immediately sized me up. He saw a desperate, exhausted woman clutching a newborn and dragging a suitcase. He saw an easy mark. I stepped up to the counter and pulled the diamond ring from my left hand. The platinum band felt heavy-loaded with 10 years of lies. I slid it under the metal partition. I need cash, I said, my voice hoarse but steady. The man picked it up with a pair of tweezers, barely glancing at it through his jeweler loupe before tossing it onto a velvet tray. It is a nice piece of glass, he grunted, scratching his stubble. But the market for used wedding bands is completely dead right now. Nobody wants the bad luck. I can give you $200. Take it or leave it. $200. A wave of nausea hit me. The ring was a custom piece, carefully selected and insured. $200 would barely cover a few boxes of formula and a bus ticket, leaving me nothing for emergency shelter or legal fees. I watched him reach for the cash register, a smug smile playing on his lips as he anticipated my desperate acceptance. That was the exact moment. The crying, broken mother inside me stepped aside, and the forensic analyst took over. I took a deep breath, scanning his cluttered workspace. I noticed the stack of handwritten receipts completely devoid of sales tax records. I saw the 2 separate point-of-sale terminals, one linked to the network, the other suspiciously offline. I observed the high-end designer watches sitting in the display case with altered serial numbers, items no legitimate vendor would touch. I placed both my hands flat on the scratched glass of the counter and leaned in close. That is a pristine, internally flawless custom-cut Marquise diamond, weighing exactly 2.4 carats. I stated, my tone dropping to a deadpan, authoritative chill. It is set in pure 95% platinum, certified by the Gemological Institute of America, certificate number ending in 4829. The wholesale scrap value of the metal alone is worth more than $300. The stone itself has a rapid liquidation value of at least $4,000. The owner scoffed, trying to maintain his intimidating posture. Listen, lady, I told you the price. I do not care about your fancy certificate. I did not blink. I continued, my voice slicing through the stale air. I am a financial forensic analyst. I trace hidden assets and corporate money laundering for a living. From where I am standing, I can clearly see you are running a dual ledger system. You use the offline terminal for cash transactions to underreport your gross revenue evading federal income tax. You are fencing items with filed off serial numbers, which violates at least 3 interstate commerce regulations. If I walk out of here with $200, my very next stop is the local field office of the Internal Revenue Service. I will personally draft a whistleblower report detailing your unreported cash flow, your inventory discrepancies, and your blatant tax evasion. A full audit will shut this place down by Friday, and you will be facing severe federal penalties. The smug smile vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden nervous sheen of sweat. He looked at me again, truly looking this time, and realized he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. The desperate housewife was gone. He was staring at a woman who could dismantle his entire livelihood with a single phone call. "What do you want?" he muttered, his bravado entirely crushed. $800, I demanded. Crisp bills. Right now. He did not argue. He opened his register, his hands moving with frantic urgency, and counted out 8 $100 bills. He slid the cash under the partition without making eye contact. I snatched the money, verified the count with a swift flick of my thumb, and turned away. I pushed open the heavy glass door and stepped back out into the fading daylight, the cash gripped tightly in my fist. $800 was a pathetic return for a ring that had once symbolized my entire future, but it was enough to buy a ticket on the Greyhound bus to the neighboring state. I needed to get to my parents' house. It was a toxic, suffocating environment, but it was the only shelter available for my baby. I pulled my suitcase down the cracked pavement toward the bus terminal. Leo had finally fallen asleep against my chest, his steady breathing the only thing keeping my legs moving forward. The walk was agonizing, every step, sending fresh waves of pain through my healing body, but the adrenaline from the pawn shop victory kept me focused. I had survived the first hurdle. I had secured our immediate survival. Just as the glowing blue sign of the Greyhound station came into view, my phone vibrated intensely in my coat pocket. I stopped under a flickering street lamp and pulled the device out, expecting another cruel message from Trevor. Instead, the screen displayed an urgent automated notification from the Premier Credit Monitoring Service my firm required all employees to use. The subject line glowed in stark red text. Urgent alert. Commercial loan disbursed. My brow furrowed in confusion. I tapped the notification, opening the detailed email. The text on the screen laid out a financial transaction that made the blood freeze in my veins. A business loan in the amount of $500,000 had just been approved, finalized, and fully disbursed by a major commercial bank. The primary guarantor listed on the loan documents was not Trevor, it was me. My eyes darted across the digital document, absorbing the terrifying reality of what I was seeing. Trevor had not just forged my signature on the power of attorney to sell our house. He had used my pristine credit score, my impeccable financial history, and my forged consent to secure a massive corporate loan for a shell company. He had taken the $500,000 and run to Miami with Amber, leaving the entire debt squarely on my shoulders. The air trapped in my lungs refused to escape. As a forensic analyst, I knew exactly what this meant. This was not just a messy divorce dispute over credit card debt. This was $500,000 of commercial liability. When the first payment bounced, the bank would not go after Trevor. They would come after me. The federal authorities would classify this as massive wire fraud and identity theft. Since my name was on the authorized guarantor line, I would be legally responsible. If I could not prove the forgery and stop him, the bank would seize my wages for the rest of my life, and I would be facing federal prison time for a debt I never touched. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the cold wind whipping around me as my 5-day-old son slept peacefully against my chest. Trevor had not just left me homeless. He had actively set a trap to lock me in a cage. I looked up at the bus station doors, clutching my $800, realizing that my fight for survival had just escalated into a fight for my freedom. The automatic sliding doors of the bus terminal parted, hitting me with a blast of stale air, cheap floor cleaner, and the heavy scent of diesel exhaust. I tightened my grip on my suitcase and cradled Leo closer to my chest. Every step sent a jolt of fire through my surgical incision. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating the scuffed linoleum floors and rows of battered plastic chairs. I marched straight to the ticketing counter. A one-way ticket to my parents' house in the neighboring state cost me $95. I paid in cash from the pawn shop money, carefully tucking the remaining bills into my inner coat pocket. Every dollar was now a shield against a federal indictment. I found an empty seat in the far corner of the waiting area. My body throbbed with a dull, relentless ache. I bought a stale turkey sandwich from a vending machine and sat down, forcing myself to take a bite, just to keep my milk supply up for my newborn. I was effectively homeless, facing $500,000 in fraudulent corporate debt and bleeding from major surgery. I was the absolute last person on earth who could afford to be a savior today. Across the terminal, a loud commotion broke my intense focus. Two station security guards were towering over an older man seated on a wooden bench. The man looked completely disheveled. He wore an oversized, faded trench coat that had seen better days, and his gray hair was windblown and messy. He looked like just another stranded soul forgotten by the city. But the security guards were treating him like a criminal. "I told you my wallet was stolen while I was washing my hands in the restroom," the older man said. His voice was surprisingly calm, completely lacking the frantic edge of someone trying to pull a scam. "I just need a ticket to the downtown hub." "Yeah, right," the taller guard sneered, slapping his baton against his palm. "We hear that sob story 5 times a day. You have no ticket and no money. You are loitering. Get out before I call the real police and have you arrested for trespassing." The older man did not raise his voice, but I saw the subtle tightening of his jaw. He was a man stripped of his dignity in a public space, treated as entirely disposable. My analytical brain, honed by years of forensic observation, automatically processed the details. Despite his unkempt hair and faded coat, his posture was rigidly straight. His hands were clean, his fingernails neatly trimmed. His shoes, though scuffed and muddy, were Goodyear welted Oxfords. He was not a vagrant, he was just a man having a catastrophic day. The sheer injustice of the guards bullying him hit a nerve I could not ignore. I knew exactly what it felt like to be stripped of everything and thrown out onto the street without warning. I stood up, ignoring the shooting pain in my abdomen, and walked over to the guards. I pulled a crisp $50 bill from my pocket. It was a significant piece of my survival fund money I desperately needed for diapers and formula. But my sense of justice overruled my financial panic. "Back off," I said, my voice cutting through the terminal noise with absolute corporate authority. "He is not loitering. He is traveling with me." The guards looked at me, taking in my pale face, the newborn strapped to my chest, and the $50 bill in my hand. They muttered something under their breath and walked away to harass someone else. I handed the bill to the older man. "The ticket counter is right over there," I told him flatly. "That should cover the fare to the downtown hub, with enough left over for a hot meal." The man looked at the money, then slowly looked up at my face. His eyes were incredibly sharp, an intense, piercing blue that seemed entirely out of place on a destitute drifter. He did not immediately reach for the cash. "You look like you need this money more than I do," he said quietly, his gaze dropping briefly to the sleeping baby against my chest. "I will manage," I replied. I reached into my bag, pulled out the untouched half of my vending machine sandwich, and offered it to him. "Take this too. You cannot travel on an empty stomach." He accepted the wrapped half sandwich and the bill with a slow, measured nod. "You are a very observant young woman," he said, his tone carrying a strange, heavy weight. Before I could respond, my phone began to vibrate violently in my coat pocket. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. Patricia. I hesitated, my stomach clenching. My family was toxic, obsessed with social status and appearances, but they were my only option for shelter. I answered the call, bracing myself for the wave I knew was coming. "Madeline," Patricia shrieked the moment the line connected. Her voice was shrill, echoing with performative outrage. "Trevor just called your father and me. He is absolutely devastated. He said you went completely crazy, packed a bag, and abandoned him in your new house just days after having the baby. What is wrong with you?" I closed my eyes, the sheer audacity of Trevor's lie temporarily taking my breath away. He had not just stolen my money and my credit. He had weaponized my own family against me. He had spun a narrative where I was the unstable postpartum runaway wife, making himself the victim so no one would look at the bank accounts. "Trevor sold the house, Mom," I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. "He forged my signature, drained our joint accounts, took out a massive fraudulent business loan in my name, and left for Miami with his junior assistant. I have exactly $0 to my name and nowhere to sleep." Patricia scoffed, a dismissive, ugly sound that I had heard my entire life. Trevor is a highly successful executive. Why would he do something so ridiculous? You are always making up these wild analytical conspiracies because you cannot handle normal emotions. You just gave birth. You are hormonal and hysterical. Trevor said you need professional help. Get back there right now, apologize to your husband, and fix your marriage. You are embarrassing this family. I did not argue. You cannot present forensic evidence to people who willfully choose ignorance. I pressed the end call button and immediately blocked her number. I would have to face them eventually to claim the guest bedroom, but right now I could not waste precious energy fighting a battle I was not yet equipped to win. Family troubles, the older man asked softly. I looked down at him, my expression hardening into a mask of cold resolve. Just a temporary miscalculation in my risk assessment, I replied, slipping back into my corporate armor. But I specialize in auditing fraud. I will balance the ledger eventually. The terminal loudspeaker crackled to life, announcing the departure of my northbound bus. I grabbed my suitcase handle, wincing as my core muscles protested the movement. "What is your name?" the old man asked, standing up. The $50 bill was still clenched tightly in his hand. I looked at him. I did not want to give out my full identity. Not with a $500,000 federal fraud hanging over my head and a manipulative husband likely tracking my digital footprint. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my bus ticket receipt, and tore off the bottom corner where my first name was printed in bold black ink. I handed the small scrap of paper to him. "Madeline," I said, "buy your ticket. The storm is getting worse." I turned away, pulling my suitcase toward the boarding gate, stepping out into the freezing torrential rain. I had absolutely no idea that the bedraggled old man I had just left behind was holding a piece of paper that would soon become the most lethal weapon I could ever possess. The Greyhound bus rattled through the raging storm for hours. I sat near the back, shielding Leo from the drafty window with my thin hospital coat. Every bump in the road sent a searing spike of agony through my healing abdomen. I had not slept in 2 days. My bank accounts were entirely drained, my credit was hijacked for $500,000, and my body was failing. Yet my mind remained razor sharp. I spent the entire agonizing ride calculating my next move. I needed a secure base of operations. I needed a secure internet connection. I needed my parents. Dawn was just beginning to break when the local cab dropped me off at the end of a pristine, manicured driveway. The sprawling brick estate stood behind wrought iron gates, practically radiating old money and suburban superiority. This was the house I grew up in, a house where appearances mattered more than oxygen. I dragged my heavy suitcase up the long paved walkway, the wheels clicking loudly in the quiet morning air. My clothes were soaked from the rain, and Leo was beginning to stir against my chest, hungry and cold. I reached the grand mahogany double doors and pressed the glowing doorbell. The heavy door swung inward. My father, Richard, stood in the foyer wearing a crisp cashmere sweater and perfectly tailored slacks. He did not gasp. He did not reach out to take his crying 5-day-old grandson. He did not offer a single word of comfort to his daughter who stood shivering on his porch. Richard looked down at my feet. His upper lip curled in profound disgust. "Wipe your shoes, Madeline," he commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are dripping muddy water all over the imported Persian runner. Your mother just had these rugs professionally cleaned for the showcase party." I stared at him, my brain struggling to reconcile the sheer lack of humanity. "Dad," I whispered, stepping inside and carefully wiping my boots on the mat. "I have nowhere else to go." Trevor locked me out, emptied the accounts, and took out a massive fraudulent loan in my name. "I am bleeding. I need help." My mother, Patricia, strode into the foyer holding a steaming cup of artisan coffee. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked me up and down with an expression of sheer embarrassment. "Stop being so dramatic, Madeline," Patricia scolded, crossing her arms. "We already spoke to Trevor. He called us from the airport. He was in tears, telling us how you suffered a complete mental breakdown, refused to take your medication, and abandoned your own home. He is giving you space to cool off. You are humiliating this family by showing up looking like a vagrant." Before I could even process the sheer volume of Trevor's calculated manipulation, a loud, obnoxious laugh echoed from the top of the grand staircase. My younger sister Brittany descended the steps like she was walking a red carpet. She was dripping in fresh, loud designer labels, sporting a diamond necklace that caught the morning light. She was the undisputed golden child, the one who never had to study, never had to work, and never faced a single consequence. Right behind her strutted her husband, Malik. He was a tall African-American man, wearing a flashy, oversized designer suit that screamed sudden, unearned wealth. He wore dark sunglasses indoors and a heavy gold watch that looked conspicuously out of place on his wrist. Malik had spent the last 3 years bouncing between failed ventures, always claiming he was just one pitch away from becoming a tech mogul. Malik paused on the landing, looking down at me with a sneer that twisted his features into a mask of pure arrogance. "Look who could not keep a man!" Malik mocked, his voice booming through the foyer. "The great financial genius of the family standing here completely broke. You spent all those years studying spreadsheets, Madeline, but you clearly have no idea how to build real value. You should learn from Brittany. She knows how to support a visionary. I am about to make her a billionaire by Friday." Brittany giggled, wrapping her arms around Malik's shoulders. "Do not be too hard on her, babe," Brittany cooed, dripping with venomous pity. "Not everyone is meant for the elite lifestyle. Some people are just destined to be dumped housewives." I tightened my grip on Leo. My analytical mind automatically scanned Malik. The suit was poorly tailored, an off-the-rack purchase bought solely for the brand name. The gold watch was a bulky, flashy model favored by newly rich amateurs, not actual billionaires. He was projecting an illusion of wealth, a fragile facade that I could already see cracking at the seams. But my parents were entirely bought in. "That is enough," Richard said, puffing out his chest with pride as he looked at Malik. "Malik is preparing for the final funding round of his startup. We are hosting a massive investor dinner here to celebrate. We do not need your hysterical divorce drama ruining the energy of this house." I swallowed the rage burning in my throat. I did not care about their delusions of grandeur. I only cared about my son. "I just need a bed," I said, keeping my voice deadpan and professional. "I need the oldest room upstairs. Leo needs to be laid down in a warm space, and I need to change my surgical dressings." Patricia stepped directly in front of the staircase, blocking my path like a sentinel guarding a fortress. "Absolutely not," Patricia snapped. "The upstairs guest suites have been entirely redecorated and locked. They are strictly reserved for Malik's elite venture capitalist investors who are flying in this week. I will not have a crying baby and a depressed, abandoned wife ruining the aesthetic of those rooms. The investors demand absolute perfection." My father pointed toward the narrow, dark door at the end of the hallway, the door that led beneath the house. "You can take the unfinished basement," Richard ordered. "There is an old cot down there. Stay out of sight. Do not come upstairs when the guests arrive, and keep that baby quiet. This family is on the verge of monumental success, Madeline. Do not drag us down to your level." Patricia handed me a thin, scratchy blanket from the hall closet and turned her back on me, immediately asking Malik what kind of caviar he preferred for the evening reception. I stood in the foyer of the house I grew up in, bleeding, exhausted, and utterly betrayed by the people who shared my DNA. They had chosen a flashy, arrogant fraud over their own flesh and blood. I did not cry. I did not argue. I took the thin blanket, gripped my suitcase handle, and walked toward the basement door. I descended the wooden steps into the damp, freezing darkness. The air smelled of mildew and cold concrete. I laid my sleeping son gently onto the dusty cot and wrapped the blanket tightly around him. My family thought they were banishing a broken, defeated victim to the shadows. They had absolutely no idea that they had just locked a lethal financial predator inside their own house. I sat on the freezing concrete floor, staring into the dark, and silently promised myself that I would burn their entire artificial empire to ash. The cold concrete of the basement floor leached the remaining warmth from my bones. I spent my first night back in my childhood home, huddled on a rusty, spring-broken cot, wrapping my body around my newborn son to share my body heat. Every time I shifted, the fresh staples in my abdomen pulled and burned. But sleep was a luxury I could not afford. At exactly 6 in the morning, the heavy wooden door at the top of the stairs swung open. The harsh glare of the hallway light flooded the stairwell. My mother, Patricia, stood at the landing. She did not ask how I had slept. She did not ask if her grandson was warm. "Get up, Madeline," Patricia ordered, her voice sharp and impatient. "If you are going to hide out down there rent-free while your husband graciously gives you time to fix your mental issues, you are going to earn your keep. Alec is preparing for the most critical presentation of his life. I want fresh coffee, poached eggs, and the kitchen completely sanitized by the time he comes downstairs. Do not make a sound that might ruin his focus." The door slammed shut. I looked down at Leo, who was mercifully asleep, swaddled tightly in the single scratchy blanket they had provided. I forced myself to stand. I pushed past the physical agony radiating from my surgical wounds, locking my pain away in a mental vault. I was operating purely on adrenaline and maternal instinct. I walked up the wooden stairs, ready to play the role of the broken, subservient maid they so desperately wanted me to be. The kitchen upstairs was a stark contrast to my damp prison. It gleamed with stainless steel appliances and imported marble countertops. I tied an apron over my wrinkled, stained hospital clothes and began preparing their lavish breakfast. I brewed the expensive artisanal coffee, poached the eggs perfectly, and arranged everything on a silver serving tray. All the while, my mind was racing, cataloging every possible way I could regain access to a secure computer to freeze Trevor out of my stolen identity. I carried the heavy silver tray out of the kitchen and into the formal dining room. The space was dominated by a massive mahogany table. Malik sat at the head of it, wearing a tailored emerald green suit that was far too flashy for a morning business meeting. He was aggressively pounding the keys of his sleek silver laptop, a deep scowl ruining his carefully curated appearance. Brittany sat adjacent to him, utterly bored, scrolling through her phone while ignoring her husband's rising temper. "These numbers are entirely wrong," Malik hissed to himself, aggressively dragging his mouse across the screen. "The valuation multiplier makes no sense. The venture capital guys are going to ask about the offshore capital injection, and this spreadsheet looks like a complete mess." I approached the table silently and placed the coffee cup down near his right hand. As I did, my eyes naturally swept over his laptop screen. I could not help it. I am a financial forensic analyst. Staring at raw data is my native language. In less than 3 seconds, my brain processed the columns, the equity distributions, and the capital flow charts displayed on his screen. It was a catastrophe. A massive glaring error jumped out at me immediately. He had categorized a series of large undocumented wire transfers as accredited investor equity. But the structure of the holding company he was using violated basic federal guidelines. If you present those specific equity distributions to a legitimate venture capital firm, you are going to trigger an automatic federal audit, I said quietly. My professional instincts temporarily overriding my instinct to stay silent. You have commingled unaccredited offshore funds with domestic operating capital. It is a fatal Securities and Exchange Commission compliance flaw. They will reject your pitch deck in 5 minutes. Malik froze. His hands stopped hovering over the keyboard. He slowly turned his head to look at me, his dark eyes narrowing into slits of pure, unadulterated rage. His fragile ego, built entirely on the illusion of his own brilliance, shattered the moment a woman in a dirty apron corrected his math. He grabbed the steaming cup of coffee I had just poured. With a vicious sweeping motion, he hurled it directly at the floor by my feet. The ceramic mug shattered into dozens of jagged pieces. Boiling hot coffee splashed violently across my bare shins and soaked into my only pair of shoes. I gasped, stumbling backward to avoid the broken shards, my surgical incision screaming in protest at the sudden movement. "Do not ever let a dumped housewife touch my $1 million pitch deck," Malik roared, standing up so quickly his chair tipped over and crashed onto the hardwood floor. "Who do you think you are? You could not even keep a husband interested long enough to secure your own bank account. You know absolutely nothing about high-level venture capital. I am building a technology empire. You are just a pathetic maid hiding in your parents' basement. Get out of my sight." Brittany finally looked up from her phone, rolling her eyes. "Seriously, Madeline," she sighed, sounding completely inconvenienced by my presence. "Go get a mop. You are ruining the vibe in here, and Malik has actual billionaire investors to impress today." Patricia rushed into the dining room, drawn by the sound of shattering ceramics. Instead of asking if I was burned, she immediately glared at the dark coffee stains seeping into her expensive dining room rug. She pointed a trembling finger at the door. "Clean this up instantly," Patricia hissed. "I told you not to distract him. You are a complete disaster, Madeline." I did not defend myself. I did not yell back. I kept my face entirely blank, a perfect mask of submission. I turned around, walked to the utility closet, and retrieved a damp rag and a bucket. I returned to the dining room and dropped to my knees right beside the heavy mahogany table. I began wiping up the spilled coffee and collecting the sharp, jagged pieces of the broken mug. But as I knelt there on the floor, my face was now perfectly level with the edge of the table. I was just inches away from Malik's open laptop. While he paced around the room loudly complaining to Brittany about my incompetence, my eyes locked onto his spreadsheet. I did not just look at the errors this time. I looked at the specific data points. I memorized the routing numbers displayed in the corner. I memorized the complex nested LLC structures he was using to funnel the offshore money. I committed the exact name of his primary shell company to memory. My brain analyzed the burn rate of the capital versus the supposed operational costs. The numbers did not align with a technology startup. The capital injections were structured in highly specific repetitive increments, mathematically designed to fall just below the $10,000 federal bank reporting threshold. A technique known as smurfing. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Malik was not building a software company. He had no product. He had no actual technology. Malik was running a crude, highly illegal money laundering operation for an offshore entity, and my parents had just mortgaged their entire social and financial reputation to back him. I wrung the coffee-stained rag out over the bucket, staring at the dark liquid. I had just found the exact ammunition I needed to send my arrogant brother-in-law to a federal penitentiary. I wrung out the coffee-stained rag into the plastic bucket. The dark liquid spiraled into the soapy water, mirroring my sudden realization about Malik. I was running a textbook smurfing operation, breaking down massive illegal offshore deposits into smaller transactions to deliberately bypass federal banking alerts. I wiped the hardwood floor until it shined, keeping my head bowed in perfect submission. Patricia marched into the dining room, inspecting my work with a critical sneer. She warned me again to stay completely out of sight before the investors arrived. I did not utter a single word of protest. I simply picked up my bucket and descended the wooden stairs back into the damp, freezing darkness of the basement. My physical pain was excruciating. The staples in my abdomen burned with a raw, sharp intensity every time I bent over to check on Leo. He was sleeping soundly, wrapped tightly in the scratchy blanket on the rusty cot. I needed to act. Malik's financial crimes were a fascinating and lethal discovery, but my immediate catastrophic threat was Trevor. $500,000 of commercial liability was hanging over my head like a guillotine. If I did not unravel Trevor's fraudulent loan, I would be the one going to federal prison. I scanned the cluttered, unfinished basement. Beyond the dusty boxes of holiday decorations and old golf clubs, I spotted a heavy plastic storage bin. Poking out from beneath the lid was a thick black power cord. I quietly dragged the bin aside. Inside sat an old, heavy discarded laptop. My father had thrown it down here 2 years ago, complaining that the processor was far too slow for his daily web browsing. He had bought a sleek new tablet and tossed this machine aside like garbage. But to a forensic financial analyst, any machine with a basic motherboard and a wireless card is a loaded weapon. I pulled the heavy laptop onto a wobbly wooden workbench. I found a flickering electrical outlet near the water heater and plugged the cord in. The machine groaned to life, the internal cooling fan whirring loudly in the quiet basement. I held my breath, praying the noise would not echo through the floorboards above. The screen flickered, casting a pale bluish glow across the concrete walls. I quickly connected to the house guest network. The wireless signal was weak, but it was enough. I cracked my knuckles and went to work. I bypassed the standard consumer credit portals and accessed the back-end institutional clearinghouses I utilized at my firm. I pulled the master file on my own stolen identity. The digital paperwork for the $500,000 commercial loan flooded the screen. Trevor had been thorough with the forgery, utilizing my tax identification numbers and my impeccable 10-year credit history to fast-track the approval process. But Trevor was just a middle management tech guy. He understood marketing campaigns and glossy sales pitches. He did not understand the immutable, permanent nature of digital financial forensics. Money never truly vanishes. It always leaves a wake. I isolated the disbursement routing number. Trevor had immediately wired the $500,000 out of the primary lending bank the very moment the funds cleared. He routed the capital into a Delaware-based limited liability company. I pulled the public registration records for that specific LLC. It was a classic dummy corporation registered to a generic agent service with no actual physical storefront or operational footprint. From Delaware, the funds were split in half and bounced to two separate shell companies in Wyoming, a state notorious for protecting corporate anonymity. Trevor clearly thought this labyrinth of dummy corporations would wash the money clean. He thought he had built an impenetrable fortress. I dismantled his fortress in exactly 45 minutes. I ran a cross-referencing algorithm on the Wyoming entities, matching their banking transit numbers against federal corporate tax databases. I found the nexus point. The two Wyoming accounts converged and wired the entire sum into a single private offshore trust located in the Cayman Islands. I leaned closer to the glowing screen, ignoring the sharp ache in my spine. I accessed international corporate registries, utilizing backdoors I had learned during my most complex corporate fraud audits. I stripped away the layers of privacy protection shielding the Cayman Trust. I did not find Amber's name. I did not find a luxury real estate broker in Miami. The trust belonged to a man named Gregory Thorne. I ran his name through professional networking databases. The search results loaded instantly. Gregory Thorne was the Senior Executive Vice President of Talent Acquisition at a highly prestigious Tier 1 technology firm in Silicon Valley. The pieces of the puzzle violently snapped together. Trevor had not stolen the money to buy a beach house or fund a romantic getaway with his mistress. He had used my stolen $500,000 to pay a massive untraceable bribe. He had bought his way into a fast-tracked elite vice president position at a top-tier technology firm. He had purchased his shiny new corporate crown with my blood, my credit, and my forged signature. My fingers flew across the sticky, outdated keyboard. I needed to know exactly which company had just hired my fraudulent ex-husband. I pulled up the public press releases for Gregory Thorne's technology firm. I scanned the corporate letterhead and the most recent financial disclosures. The firm was not an independent Silicon Valley startup. It had been aggressively acquired and restructured just 8 months prior. I scrolled to the bottom of their corporate hierarchy chart to find the ultimate parent company. The text at the bottom of the page was small, but it carried the weight of a nuclear bomb. The firm was a direct subsidiary of a massive global private equity conglomerate. I read the name of the parent company out loud in the freezing damp basement. Kensington Holdings. My heart slammed against my ribs. Kensington Holdings, the exact same parent conglomerate owned by Theodore Kensington, the unkempt old man I had bought a bus ticket for just a few days ago. The stolen money Trevor had used to build his new life was sitting inside the corporate ecosystem of the very man I had helped. I sat back in the creaking wooden chair, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. Trevor thought he had buried me in the dark, but he had unknowingly locked himself inside a cage, and fate had just handed me the key. The damp basement walls seemed to vibrate. The sensation did not come from the monumental financial revelation I had just uncovered about my ex-husband. It came from the heavy rhythmic bass of the music directly above my head. It was Saturday evening. Patricia and Richard were hosting a massive, extravagant neighborhood soiree. I could hear the sharp clinking of expensive crystal glasses and the booming performative laughter of Malik echoing through the thin wooden floorboards. They were celebrating his impending investment, flaunting a fraudulent triumph to everyone in their wealthy suburban circle. Earlier that afternoon, Patricia had marched down the wooden stairs, her heels clicking aggressively against the steps. She had handed me a single paper plate holding a few cold appetizers. She did not ask how my surgical wounds were healing. She did not ask if her infant grandson was warm enough in the freezing, drafty air. Stay completely out of sight. Patricia had commanded, adjusting her designer pearls with a look of absolute disdain. We have highly influential people arriving tonight. Malik is about to secure a multi-million-dollar deal. Leo crying will completely ruin the aesthetic of the evening. Do not humiliate this family by showing your face and reminding everyone that my daughter is a dumped, unemployed housewife. She had locked the basement door from the outside. I was literally trapped beneath their feet. My phone buzzed against the cold concrete floor. I picked it up. It was a text message from my sister Brittany. The image loaded slowly on the weak basement wireless network. It was a selfie of her holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. She was wearing a sequined gown that likely cost more than my entire hospital delivery bill. Her makeup was flawless, her smile sharp and predatory. The caption beneath the photo was dripping with venom. "This is what winners look like," the text read. "Stay downstairs where you belong." I did not reply. I simply locked the screen and set the phone aside. They were celebrating a grand house of cards built entirely on federal crimes. My physical pain from the cesarean section was fading into the background, completely overridden by the pure adrenaline of my investigation. I needed more data on Malik. The digital footprint I had seen on his laptop was just the surface. He was hiding something much larger, and men like Malik always kept trophies of their deceit. As I paced the narrow, unlit corridor of the basement to soothe Leo back to sleep, my eyes caught a dull glint of metal in the dark corner. Behind a stack of old winter coats and discarded holiday decorations sat a sleek black leather briefcase. It was the same designer case Malik had been carrying the morning I arrived. He had carelessly tossed it down here into the storage space after purchasing a much flashier monogrammed version to impress his so-called investors. I set Leo gently onto the center of the rusty cot, ensuring he was safely wrapped in the thin blanket, and approached the briefcase. The brass combination locks on the leather straps were firmly engaged. As a forensic analyst, I knew that arrogant amateur criminals always used highly predictable numerical sequences, birth years, anniversaries, or simple repetitive patterns. I spun the tiny brass dials. I tried Brittany's birth year first. Nothing. I tried the current year. The left latch clicked open with a sharp snap. I moved to the right side and tried Malik's birth year. The right latch sprang open instantly. He was as unoriginal in his security as he was in his business strategy. I opened the heavy leather flap. Inside lay a disorganized, chaotic stack of thick watermarked documents. Malik was so utterly convinced of his own invincibility that he did not even bother to shred his physical paper trails. I pulled out the thickest bound document in the pile. It was the official Series A term sheet for his shell company. I flipped past the bloated executive summaries, the stolen graphs, and the meaningless technology buzzwords. I bypassed the marketing garbage and went straight for the capital distribution agreements and the underwriting signatures. I needed to see exactly who was stupid enough or corrupt enough to funnel $10 million into a blatantly obvious money laundering operation. I scanned the dense legal paragraphs, my eyes searching for the principal investor declaration. I found the page. The venture capital firm providing the funding was listed as Apex Vanguard Partners. I knew that name intimately from my days auditing high-level corporate accounts. It was a highly aggressive boutique investment branch known for throwing massive amounts of capital at emerging technology sectors. But I also knew their corporate lineage. I had personally audited their structural framework 3 years ago. Apex Vanguard Partners was not an independent entity. They were an acquisition arm. I traced my index finger down the heavy paper, moving to the fine print at the very bottom of the underwriting agreement, the section where the ultimate financial liability of the fund was legally declared. The letters printed on the page made the breath freeze in my lungs for the second time that night. The parent conglomerate backing the entire fund, Kensington Holdings. I stared at the black ink until the letters began to blur. Malik's fraudulent startup was receiving its millions directly from Kensington Holdings. Trevor had bought his fraudulent executive title at a tech firm owned entirely by Kensington Holdings. Both of my enemies, both of the arrogant men who had gleefully destroyed my life and mocked my existence, were secretly feeding from the exact same corporate trough. They were unknowingly siphoning their illegal wealth from the massive financial empire of Theodore Kensington, the destitute man I had bought a bus ticket for just days ago. I carefully placed the documents back into the leather briefcase and snapped the brass locks shut. The music upstairs continued to thump, shaking the dust from the exposed wooden beams above my head. The laughter of my family echoed down the stairwell, a loud, triumphant celebration of their impending elite status. I looked up at the wooden ceiling, a cold, deeply calculated smile forming on my lips. My mother had locked me in the dark to protect her perfect aesthetic. She had no idea she had just locked me in a room with the exact information I needed to orchestrate their absolute destruction. They were throwing a lavish party on top of a financial landmine, and I was officially holding the detonator. I slid the thick watermarked documents back into the black leather briefcase and spun the brass dials, locking Malik's financial death warrant safely away in the dark. I retreated to the rusty cot, wrapping my arms protectively around my sleeping son. Leo breathed softly against my chest, completely oblivious to the freezing dampness of our concrete prison. My physical pain had vanished entirely, consumed by the white-hot clarity of my discovery. I was a financial forensic analyst, sitting on a mountain of federal wire fraud, and the people hosting a lavish celebration directly above my head were the primary suspects. The party upstairs had reached a fever pitch. I could hear the sharp clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the booming performative laughter of my father. Richard was holding court in the grand foyer, loudly bragging to the affluent suburban neighbors about his brilliant son-in-law. I heard Patricia directing the catering staff, her voice shrill and demanding, making sure everyone noticed the expensive hors d'oeuvres she had purchased using money stolen from their own home equity. Then I heard Malik. His voice carried straight down through the wooden floorboards, dripping with unearned arrogance. He was boasting to a group of local businessmen about his disruptive technology platform and his imminent multi-million-dollar valuation. He spoke in empty corporate buzzwords, throwing around terms like synergy, aggressive scaling, and offshore capital injection. He sounded like a man who had already conquered the world. Brittany chimed in, her voice, artificially sweet, loudly complaining about the difficulties of finding a private jet charter that met her exacting standards for their upcoming victory vacation to Monaco. I sat in the dark, resting my chin against the top of Leo's head. They were so utterly consumed by their own performance that they could not see the cliff edge rapidly approaching their feet. They had built a glittering castle on a foundation of gasoline, and I was simply waiting for the match to strike. The strike came exactly 20 minutes later. It started as a low, heavy vibration. It was not the rhythmic thumping of the party music. This was a deep mechanical rumble that shook the dust from the exposed wooden beams above me. The high-pitched pop music blaring through the house speakers was abruptly cut off. A sudden tense silence fell over the crowded living room. I stood up, holding Leo securely, and moved toward the small grime-covered window at the top of the concrete wall. I stood on an empty plastic storage crate, wiping away a layer of condensation to peer out at the street level. The sight outside made my heart hammer against my ribs. A massive, heavily armored convoy was rolling down the quiet suburban street. 2 tactical black SUVs led the way, their heavily tinted windows reflecting the streetlights. Behind them glided an impossibly long custom-built black limousine. It was not a standard luxury rental. It was a bulletproof military-grade transport vehicle, the kind utilized exclusively by heads of state and top-tier global billionaires. 2 more black SUVs brought up the rear, sealing off the entire street. The convoy did not bother parking neatly along the curb. The lead vehicles aggressively jumped the manicured curb, parking directly on Patricia's prized front lawn. The heavy diesel engines idled with a menacing, predatory growl. The reaction upstairs was instantaneous. Heavy footsteps scrambled across the hardwood floors. I heard Patricia gasp, her voice echoing through the air vents. "Richard, look at the security cameras." "Are those the investors?" Patricia frantically whispered. "Look at those vehicles, they parked on the grass." Malik's voice boomed thick with desperate excitement. "I told you they were sending the heavy hitters. The venture capital guys must have flown in early to finalize the term sheets. They want to lock me in before anyone else gets a piece of the pie." "Brittany, fix your hair. Richard, get the expensive scotch out of the private cabinet. Nobody says a word until I shake their hands." The rapid clicking of expensive heels rushed toward the foyer. I stepped down from the plastic crate and walked silently to the base of the basement stairs. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the locked door, listening as the scene unfolded just inches away from my face. The heavy oak front door was thrown open. The cold night air rushed into the house, carrying the low rumble of the idling engines. I heard the synchronized heavy thud of combat boots stepping onto the front porch. 4 men had exited the SUVs flanking the front door. The heavy door of the limousine opened with a distinct pressurized hiss. "Welcome to our home, gentlemen," Malik announced, his voice projecting a forced, booming confidence. "I am Malik. I assume you are here representing the principal fund. We have the champagne ready inside. Please step into the foyer." I heard the solid, authoritative strike of leather dress shoes stepping over the threshold and onto the imported Persian runner. The man who entered did not speak immediately. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could practically feel the overwhelming, intimidating aura radiating from the entryway. This was not a man who engaged in small talk. This was a man who owned the building, the bank, and the ground beneath it. Malik chuckled nervously, clearly unsettled by the lack of response. As I outlined in the pitch deck, our growth metrics are ready for immediate scaling. If you will just follow me to the formal dining room, we can get down to business. Malik clearly extended his hand. I heard the sharp rustle of fabric, but there was no sound of a handshake. When the man finally spoke, his voice was a deep, resonant baritone that carried the absolute terrifying weight of unlimited power. It was not a voice accustomed to negotiating. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders that shaped global markets. "Do not touch me," the man commanded. The temperature in the foyer seemed to drop 10 degrees. Malik stammered, the arrogant bravado instantly draining from his throat. "I apologize, sir. I just assumed that Kensington Holdings sent you to finalize the capital transfer for my startup." The lead security agent stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing like gunshots against the hardwood floor. He looked at Malik, then at Richard and Patricia, his voice laced with pure, undisguised disgust. "We are not here for your fraudulent startup. We are not here to drink your cheap scotch. We are here for Madeline." A sharp collective gasp echoed from my family. Patricia tried to intervene, her voice shrill with panic. "There must be some mistake. You have the wrong house. Madeline is just a broken, unemployed housewife. She is locked in the basement. She has nothing to do with high-level finance." The lead agent did not even look at her. He simply raised his hand, gesturing toward the narrow hallway leading to the basement door. "Move out of the way," the agent ordered, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "Mr. Kensington is waiting." I walked up the wooden stairs, my footsteps echoing in the absolute stunned silence of the foyer. I reached the top landing and stepped into the bright light of the entryway. My father stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. Patricia looked as though the floor had simply vanished beneath her feet. Malik was trembling, his flashy designer suit suddenly looking absurdly cheap under the heavy, intimidating gaze of the security detail. Brittany stared at me, her champagne glass stalled halfway to her lips, her eyes wide with unadulterated shock. I did not utter a single word. I did not offer them a backward glance. I simply adjusted Leo in my arms, walked right past their horrified faces, and stepped out into the cool night air. The lead agent held the heavy armored door of the limousine open for me. I stepped inside and the door closed with a solid pressurized seal, instantly cutting off the chaotic noise of my parents' house. The interior of the limousine was a sanctuary of dark leather, polished mahogany, and soft ambient lighting. Sitting directly across from me was the man I had shared my last vending machine sandwich with at the grimy bus terminal. But the destitute, vulnerable drifter was completely gone. He was no longer wearing the oversized, faded trench coat. His previously unkempt gray hair was sharply styled, and he was dressed in a pristine charcoal gray bespoke suit that radiated absolute terrifying power. "You look significantly better than you did on Tuesday," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, refusing to show any intimidation. He smiled, a sharp, calculating expression that reached his piercing blue eyes. "And you look exactly like a woman who is ready to balance the ledger," he replied. "I am Theodore Kensington." Hearing the name spoken out loud confirmed everything I had just uncovered in the basement. I was sitting across from the ultimate apex predator of the financial world, the billionaire whose corporate empire was currently funding the arrogant delusions of both my ex-husband and my brother-in-law. "How did you find me?" I asked. Theodore reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a small torn piece of paper. He set it down on the polished table between us. It was the corner of the Greyhound bus ticket I had handed him, with my first name printed in bold black ink. When a woman carrying a newborn gives away her last $50 to a stranger being harassed by security, it tends to leave a lasting impression, Theodore said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. "I do not like owing debts. So I had my security director run this transaction through the terminal database. Tracking down a brilliant financial forensic analyst named Madeline, who recently purchased a one-way ticket to this exact suburb, was incredibly simple for a team with unlimited resources." I kept my face impassive. "So you came all this way just to pay me back for a bus ticket and a sandwich?" Theodore chuckled, but the sound held no humor. "No, I came because of what my team found when they started digging into your digital footprint. My investigators bypassed the standard corporate firewalls and accessed the encrypted routing histories of your previous firm. They pulled the heavily redacted files on a major banking collapse that occurred 2 years ago." My heart skipped a beat, but I maintained my professional composure. "They discovered that you are the anonymous author behind that devastating forensic teardown." Theodore continued, leaning forward, his gaze locking onto mine. You did not just audit that bank, Madeline. You digitally dissected their entire fraudulent infrastructure and handed the federal regulators a perfect, undeniable map of their crimes. You systematically hunted down billions of hidden dollars, and you burned the corrupt executives to the ground without leaving a single fingerprint. You possess a magnificent, ruthless mind for financial destruction. I tightened my hold on Leo, who was sleeping peacefully in the warmth of the limousine. What do you want from me, Mr. Kensington? Theodore reached to his side and picked up a sleek, heavily encrypted tablet. He slid it across the table toward me. The screen was glowing, displaying a complex, multifaceted organizational chart of global subsidiaries, venture capital funds, and technology acquisitions. I built a global empire, Madeline. Theodore set his tone, dropping the polite warmth and shifting into pure predatory business. But when an empire gets this large, parasites start feeding in the dark. My subsidiaries are bleeding. Arrogant middle managers, flashy amateur criminals, and lazy executives are using my corporate ecosystem to launder money, accept bribes, and buy unearned power. They think because the conglomerate is so massive, I cannot see the rats chewing on the wires. I looked down at the tablet. Right there, embedded in the center of the organizational chart, were the exact two subsidiaries I had just investigated in the basement. Apex Vanguard Partners, the venture fund backing Malik, and the technology firm that had just hired Trevor. The standard auditors are useless. Theodore spat with disgust. They only look at the surface numbers. They only see what the parasites want them to see. I do not need another weak accountant. I need someone who can see the hidden patterns the algorithms miss. Theodore tapped his heavy gold signet ring against the table, the sound sharp and demanding in the quiet cabin. The tablet in front of you contains the unrestricted master financial architecture of Kensington Holdings, Theodore stated. I am offering you absolute total access to my empire. You will have unlimited capital, an army of ruthless corporate lawyers, and the highest security clearance in my organization. I need you to hunt down the people stealing from me and annihilate them. I do not just want them fired. I want them ruined. I need an executioner. I stared at the glowing screen. The very tools required to completely dismantle Trevor and Malik were sitting right in the palm of my hand. My enemies thought they had buried me in a damp, freezing basement. They had no idea they had just handed me the keys to a financial nuclear arsenal. I looked up at Theodore Kensington, letting a cold, calculating smile spread across my face. I accept your offer, Mr. Kensington, I said smoothly. But we are going to start the executions with two very specific accounts. Theodore leaned back against the plush leather seat. He steepled his fingers, his eyes studying me with a mixture of intense curiosity and profound respect. Which accounts? He asked, his voice a low rumble over the quiet hum of the limousine engine. I tapped the encrypted tablet resting on the polished mahogany table. I opened the subsidiary map and zoomed in on the venture capital division. Apex Vanguard Partners, I stated flatly. They are preparing to disburse $10 million in Series A funding by the end of this week. The recipient is a shell company masquerading as a disruptive technology startup. In reality, it is a crude, highly illegal money laundering operation, utilizing basic smurfing techniques to bypass federal banking alerts. The man running it is my brother-in-law, Malik. He is currently hosting a celebration party in the house we just left. Theodore did not blink. He simply nodded, absorbing the data. And the second account. I swiped across the screen, bringing up a separate corporate hierarchy. A Tier 1 technology firm your conglomerate acquired 8 months ago. They just hired a new vice president of marketing. His name is Trevor. He is my ex-husband. He secured that position by paying a massive offshore bribe. He funded that bribe by forging my signature, draining my life savings, and taking out a fraudulent $500,000 commercial loan in my name. The silence in the cabin was absolute. The soft amber lighting cast sharp shadows across Theodore's face. He looked at the tablet, then back up at me. You are asking me to hand you the absolute authority of my empire so you can financially execute the father of your child and the husband of your sister, Theodore said. His tone was not judgmental. It was a test. He was measuring my resolve. I am asking you for the tools to surgically remove two massive financial liabilities from your corporate ecosystem. I corrected my voice, cold and unwavering. Their personal relation to me is irrelevant. They are thieves stealing from your conglomerate. They just made the fatal mistake of crossing the one forensic analyst capable of burning their operations to ash. A slow, predatory smile spread across Theodore Kensington's face. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a solid matte black titanium card. The Kensington Holdings crest was etched directly into the metal. He placed it on the table and pushed it toward me. "You are no longer a basement exile, Madeline," Theodore announced, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "As of this exact second, you are the executive partner of capital allocation for Kensington Holdings. You answer to no one but me. You have unlimited operational capital. You have an army of the most vicious corporate lawyers in the country on retainer. You possess the highest security clearance in my entire global organization. You have the authority to freeze assets, terminate executives, and trigger federal indictments at your own discretion." I looked at the heavy titanium card. It was not just a key, it was a weapon of mass financial destruction. "But I need to know you have the stomach for this," Theodore added, leaning forward until the space between us disappeared. "When you trigger these audits, the fallout will be catastrophic. Your parents mortgaged their entire future on Malik. Your ex-husband will face federal prison. If you flinch, if you let sentimentality or family loyalty cloud your judgment, for even a fraction of a second, my enemies will use it against us. You cannot show them an ounce of mercy." I reached out and picked up the heavy black card. The cold metal felt perfect in my palm. "The woman who cared about family loyalty died on a concrete curb 5 days ago," I said, staring directly into the billionaire's eyes. "I do not have a family anymore, Mr. Kensington. I only have targets." Theodore sat back, utterly satisfied. He pressed a button on the intercom connecting to the driver partition. "Take the executive partner to the tower," he commanded. The limousine smoothly accelerated, leaving the wealthy, artificial suburban neighborhood completely behind. We drove toward the heart of the city, where the towering skyscrapers pierced the night sky. The sheer physical exhaustion from my cesarean section was entirely muted by the surging adrenaline in my veins. I held Leo securely against my chest, feeling his tiny, steady heartbeat. I had promised to protect him, and I had just secured the ultimate fortress. 30 minutes later, the armored convoy pulled into a secure subterranean parking garage beneath a massive glass and steel high-rise. The lead bodyguard opened my door. Theodore remained in the limousine, giving me one final respectful nod before the vehicle pulled away into the night. The bodyguard escorted me to a private biometric elevator. I swiped the black titanium card and the doors glided shut. We ascended rapidly, shooting past dozens of corporate floors until the elevator chimed at the very top. The doors opened, revealing a sprawling, ultra-luxury penthouse suite that occupied the entire top floor of the building. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the glittering city skyline. The floors were heated, the air was perfectly climate-controlled, and a massive modern kitchen was fully stocked. A woman in a crisp, professional uniform stood waiting in the foyer. She introduced herself as the head of the residential staff. "We have prepared the master suite for you, Ms. Madeline," she said warmly, gesturing down the wide hallway. "We also took the liberty of setting up a premium climate-controlled nursery for the baby, fully stocked with everything you might need. A private pediatrician is on call 24 hours a day, and your personal security detail has secured the perimeter." I thanked her, my voice thick with an emotion I had not felt in weeks. Safety. I walked into the master suite. The bed was enormous, covered in pristine high-thread count linens, but my first priority was Leo. I stepped into the adjoining nursery. It was perfect. A state-of-the-art heated crib, stacks of premium formula diapers, and incredibly soft, clean clothes. I gently laid my sleeping son down onto the warm plush mattress. For the first time since he was born, he was not shivering in a drafty basement or wrapped in a scratchy, inadequate blanket. He was finally safe. I walked into the massive marble-lined master bathroom and turned on the shower. The hot water cascaded down my skin, washing away the dirt, the cold, and the profound humiliation of my parents' basement. I carefully cleaned my surgical wounds, feeling the tension physically melting out of my muscles. I was no longer a victim. I was no longer a burden. I stepped out of the shower, wrapped myself in a thick, luxurious robe, and walked out to the main living area. I poured a glass of cold water and stood in front of the massive glass windows, looking down at the millions of lights sprawling across the city below. I held the encrypted Kensington tablet in one hand and the heavy black titanium card in the other. Trevor and Malik thought they had successfully discarded me. My parents thought they had hidden their shame in the dark. They had no idea that the prey they tossed aside had just evolved into the absolute apex predator. The hunt was officially on. The morning sun reflected off the towering glass facade of the Kensington Holdings headquarters. I walked through the sliding glass doors, leaving the brisk city air behind. I wore a tailored razor-sharp suit provided by the Penthouse Concierge Service, feeling the crisp, structured fabric armor my body. The lobby was a cavernous expanse of polished marble and brushed steel. Security guards monitored the turnstiles with hawk-like precision. I did not stop at the visitor desk. I walked directly to the private biometric executive elevator. I slid the black titanium card into the reader. The scanner flashed a solid green light. The heavy steel doors parted instantly. The elevator deposited me on the 75th floor. This was the Secure Operations Center for Capital Allocation, a floor entirely isolated from the rest of the building. My new office was a massive glass-walled corner suite, equipped with 3 monitors and a direct hardwired connection to the global financial mainframe. I sat down in the ergonomic leather chair. I swiped the black card through the desktop terminal. The screens blinked to life, granting me God-tier access to every single dollar moving through the Kensington Empire. I did not waste a single second. I pulled up the internal records for Apex Vanguard Partners. I isolated Malik and his fraudulent startup. The raw financial data flowed across my screens like a digital river of absolute truth. Malik had spent the last 3 years bragging about his genius, claiming he was building a revolutionary artificial intelligence platform. The code told a completely different story. I pulled the software architecture he had submitted to the Venture Capital Committee. It was a joke. He had literally copied an open-source template from a free developer forum and slapped a sleek logo on it. The technology was entirely fake, but the money moving through the back end was very real and highly illegal. I tracked the offshore capital injections. Millions of dollars were being routed from anonymous accounts in the Caribbean, funneled through Malik to clean the cash before it entered the legitimate domestic banking system. Malik was pocketing a massive percentage as a management fee. He thought his smurfing strategy was untraceable, breaking the deposits down into smaller randomized increments. But his algorithm was lazy. I wrote a custom search script that aggregated the microtransactions. Within 20 minutes, I had compiled a pristine, undeniable federal evidence file. I had the routing numbers, the timestamps, and the IP addresses matching Malik to the fraudulent transfers. He was looking at a decade in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and money laundering. But something else caught my eye. The offshore accounts were strictly responsible for the ongoing operational funding, but Malik needed domestic capital to legitimize the initial corporate filing. He needed a clean domestic seed investment to pass the preliminary background checks. I traced the initial seed money backward. The trail led away from the Caribbean and pointed directly toward a regional bank in the suburbs. I pulled the wire authorization forms, bypassing the encrypted firewalls with a few aggressive keystrokes. My breath caught in my throat. The account belonged to Richard and Patricia, my own parents. I pulled their asset declarations. They had taken out a massive high-interest second mortgage on their pristine suburban estate. They had leveraged the very roof over their heads to hand Malik $500,000 in clean cash, just so he could establish his criminal enterprise. My parents had banished me to a freezing damp basement, treating me like a parasitic burden, all while they were actively gambling their entire financial existence on an arrogant fraud. They had bet their house on a criminal, and I was about to detonate the very company holding their money. When I turned Malik over to the federal authorities, the government would seize all assets associated with the startup. My parents would lose everything. The bank would foreclose on their beloved estate, and they would be thrown out onto the street. I stared at the transaction receipt, feeling absolutely no pity. They had chosen their golden child and her flashy husband. Now they would pay the ultimate price. I saved the encrypted evidence file and locked it away on a secure flash drive. I turned my attention to the second monitor. It was time to deal with Trevor. I navigated away from the venture capital division and accessed the human resources mainframe for the technology subsidiary Trevor had bribed his way into. My black titanium card gave me unrestricted access to employee onboarding files, payroll records, and executive compensation packages. I typed Trevor into the search bar, his fresh, newly minted corporate profile loaded onto the screen. He was officially listed as the Senior Vice President of Strategic Marketing. His base salary was staggering, accompanied by a massive stock option package and a six-figure signing bonus. He had used the money stolen from my house to bribe his way into a life of absolute luxury. I clicked on his onboarding documents, scanning his tax forms and direct deposit authorizations. I wanted to know exactly where his new unearned wealth was flowing. I scrolled down to the benefits enrollment section. My eyes fell on the emergency contact and beneficiary information. The name typed into the primary beneficiary slot was Amber. I stared at the screen, my grip tightening on the edge of the mahogany desk. Trevor had not just abandoned me and our newborn son. He had actively erased us from his legal existence. He had updated his corporate profile, listing Amber as his primary contact. Under the relationship drop-down menu, he had not selected girlfriend or partner. He had officially listed her as his wife. I was walking around his new corporate headquarters, playing the role of the successful, happily married executive with the woman who helped destroy my life. He was actively collecting a massive salary from a company owned by Theodore Kensington, completely unaware that his actual wife was currently sitting 75 floors above his head, possessing the absolute authority to terminate his employment, freeze his assets, and send him to federal prison. I closed the human resources file. The betrayal was no longer painful. It was simply gasoline poured directly onto the fire of my resolve. I picked up the office phone connecting directly to the central banking division of Kensington Holdings. It was time to show Trevor what real corporate power looked like. I picked up the secure office phone and bypassed the automated directory, dialing directly into the central banking compliance division of Kensington Holdings. When the senior director answered, I read off my newly minted executive identification number. The tone on the other end of the line instantly shifted from bureaucratic annoyance to absolute subservient compliance. I did not ask for a standard account review. I ordered a highly classified immediate shadow freeze on every single financial asset, routing number, and offshore trust associated with Trevor and his newly declared wife, Amber. A shadow freeze is a truly magnificent corporate weapon. It does not send an automated text message to the account holder. It does not trigger a courtesy email from a customer service representative. It simply waits in the dark, laying dormant like a digital landmine right until the target attempts to make a massive purchase. I hung up the phone and dragged the live transaction ledger onto my center monitor. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, sipping a glass of iced sparkling water, and waited. I wanted to witness the exact mathematical second my ex-husband realized his stolen empire was nothing but an illusion. I did not have to wait long. It took exactly 3 hours and 12 minutes. At 1:15 in the afternoon, a massive authorization request pinged across my screen. The geolocation data placed the origin point right in the heart of Miami, Florida. The merchant identification code belonged to a highly exclusive imported exotic car dealership. Trevor was attempting to process a $100,000 down payment on a luxury sports car, undoubtedly trying to impress his mistress, using the massive signing bonus he had secured through my stolen identity. I watched the green authorization code flash on the screen, requesting the capital release from the Kensington Corporate Clearinghouse. I calmly placed my hand on my computer mouse. I dragged the cursor over the pending transaction. I clicked reject. The screen flashed a brilliant, unforgiving red. Insufficient funds. Fraud lock officially engaged. I sat alone in my glass-walled penthouse office, but I could perfectly envision the scene unfolding in that glossy, high-end Miami showroom. I could picture Trevor leaning against the polished hood of a sports car, wearing a smug, arrogant grin, boasting to Amber about his newfound wealth and his elite vice president title. I could see the dealership finance manager walking back over to them, his respectful customer service smile replaced by a look of deep, uncomfortable suspicion as he handed the sleek corporate card back, explaining that the transaction had been denied. The digital ledger in front of me erupted into a flurry of frantic, desperate activity. Less than 40 seconds after the initial rejection, Trevor tried to run the card a second time. I watched the request hit the server and instantly bounce back, declined. A minute later, a new authorization request appeared. This time it was initiated from a secondary debit card registered in Amber's name. They were clearly panicking, trying to cover the humiliating rejection by using her accounts. I smiled, watching the automated system do exactly what I had designed it to do: declined. The shadow freeze had infected every single financial artery they possessed. My monitor lit up with a rapid-fire sequence of failed logins. Trevor was repeatedly attempting to access his offshore Cayman trust through his mobile browser. Access denied. He was frantically trying to log into the Human Resources portal to wire funds from his executive expense account. Access denied. The digital footprint of their meltdown was incredibly satisfying to witness. They were completely stranded in a luxury car dealership in Miami. They had no access to cash, no functioning credit cards, and no way to pay for the extravagant lifestyle they had stolen from me. I knew exactly how Trevor operated under pressure. He would not handle the public humiliation well. He was likely screaming at Amber right there on the showroom floor, his fragile ego fracturing as the reality of their sudden, inexplicable poverty set in. The heavy glass door to my office swung open, breaking my concentration. Theodore Kensington walked into the room. He did not knock. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a man who owned the very air we were breathing. He approached my desk, his sharp blue eyes scanning the 3 glowing monitors and the massive stack of black leather binders I had meticulously compiled over the last few hours. I stood up, sliding the 2 thickest binders across the polished mahogany desk toward him. The first binder contains the undeniable federal proof of the money laundering operation being run by my brother-in-law Malik, I stated, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. It includes the routing numbers of the illegal offshore capital, the fraudulent source code of his fake startup, and the exact documentation showing how my parents secretly mortgaged their home to fund his criminal enterprise. Theodore placed his hand on the first binder, but did not open it yet. And the second he asked, his baritone voice echoing slightly in the large office. The second binder details the exact method Trevor used to bribe his way into a senior executive position within your technology subsidiary, I replied. It contains the forged power of attorney, the stolen $500,000 loan documents, and the digital footprint of the offshore bribes. I have already initiated a shadow freeze on his accounts. He is currently stranded in Miami, with 0 assets. Theodore opened the binders. He did not waste time reading every single paragraph. He was a billionaire who understood the language of absolute destruction. He checked my executive summaries, verified the routing numbers, and noted the federal violation codes I had highlighted in bright red ink. He closed the heavy black covers with a loud, satisfying thud. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a king who had just been handed the heads of his enemies on a silver platter. Theodore reached into his tailored suit pocket and pulled out a solid gold biometric access keycard. It was a master override, a physical token granting unrestricted access to the deepest, most secure levels of the Kensington financial architecture. He placed the heavy gold card directly on top of Trevor's fraudulent employment file. "Burn them all to the ground," Theodore commanded, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute ruthless approval. I picked up the gold card, feeling the cool metal against my palm. I turned back to my computer terminal and opened the executive scheduling calendar. I did not just want to destroy them quietly in the dark. I wanted them to feel the exact same public humiliation they had inflicted upon me. I wanted to watch their artificial empires collapse while they were standing right in the center of the room. "I will set the date for the final corporate summit," I said, looking out the massive window at the city skyline below. "I am going to invite them all to the same table." I stared at the glowing executive scheduling calendar on my center monitor, the solid gold biometric keycard resting heavy and cool in my palm. Theodore Kensington had given me the absolute authority to dismantle my enemies, but I was not going to do it with a simple phone call or a sterile email. I wanted to look them in the eye when their artificial worlds collapsed. I opened the Kensington Holdings internal communications portal. Using the master override access, I bypassed the standard human resources department and the lower-level venture capital managers. I was going to send the invitations directly from the office of the executive partner. I started with Trevor. He was currently stranded in Miami, with 0 access to his stolen wealth, undoubtedly panicking as his credit cards continued to bounce. He needed a lifeline, something to validate his fragile ego and reassure him that his newly purchased corporate throne was still secure. I drafted a highly classified, ultra-exclusive digital summons on the official Kensington Global letterhead. The subject line read, Official Vice President Initiation and Strategic Board Introduction. I crafted the text meticulously using the exact corporate buzzwords that men like Trevor found irresistible. I formally requested his presence at the Kensington Global headquarters this coming Friday at 10 in the morning for a closed-door executive welcome. To ensure maximum devastation, I added a specific addendum stating that spouses were highly encouraged to attend the post-meeting executive luncheon. I knew Trevor would bring Amber. He was far too arrogant to leave his mistress behind when he was about to be crowned. I clicked send. The trap for my ex-husband was officially set. I immediately switched to the Venture Capital Division network and pulled up Malik's file in the Apex Vanguard Partners system. Malik was a different kind of prey. He did not crave corporate stability. He craved raw, flashy wealth and the social status that came with it. He needed to believe that his $10 million payout was sitting right across the table. I generated a final funding signature mandate. The document looked incredibly official, complete with digital watermarks and heavy legal jargon. I requested his immediate attendance for the final execution of the Series A capital transfer. I set the location for the exact same boardroom, the Apex Suite on the 75th floor at the exact same time, 10 in the morning on Friday. Knowing how desperately my family wanted to cling to Malik's fabricated success, I added a final irresistible piece of bait. I noted that primary shareholders and family members were welcome to attend the signing ceremony to witness the historic capital transition. My parents had illegally mortgaged their house to fund his shell company. There was absolutely no chance Richard and Patricia would miss the moment they thought they were becoming billionaires. I hit send on the second email. I leaned back in my chair and watched my tracking software. Within 4 minutes, a read receipt flashed on my screen from Trevor's corporate email account. A frantic, immediate response came back through the automated system. Trevor had RSVP'd yes for 2 attendees. He had taken the bait without a single second of hesitation, utterly desperate to secure the job he had bribed his way into. 6 minutes later, Malik's tracking pixel activated. I watched the network logs as he rapidly forwarded the official Kensington funding invitation to 2 other email addresses. One belonged to Brittany. The other belonged to my father, Richard. They were all scrambling to pack their bags and book flights to the city, completely blinded by their own greed. The next 48 hours moved with ruthless precision. I utilized the Kensington legal team to finalize the federal evidence binders. I coordinated directly with the corporate security director to ensure the boardroom was fully locked down. I contacted the federal authorities, utilizing Theodore Kensington's immense political leverage to have a team of agents standing by in the building lobby on Friday morning. I left absolutely nothing to chance. Friday morning arrived with a crisp, freezing chill in the air. I stood in the massive walk-in closet of my penthouse suite, inspecting my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. I bypassed the standard business wear and chose a striking razor-sharp white designer suit. It was a suit meant for a conqueror, structured and flawless, projecting absolute dominance. I pinned my hair back tightly, applying a minimalist layer of makeup. The woman staring back at me was virtually unrecognizable from the bleeding, exhausted mother who had been banished to a damp basement just a few weeks prior. I walked into the climate-controlled nursery. Leo was awake, cooing softly in the arms of the highly trained private nanny Theodore had provided. I leaned down and kissed my son on his forehead. I promised I would secure our future, I whispered to him. Today I collect on every single debt. I grabbed my encrypted tablet and headed for the private elevator. As the steel doors closed and I began the rapid descent to the 75th floor operations center, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was a text message from Brittany. I had not blocked her number yet, keeping the line open purely for intelligence gathering. I opened the message. It contained a photo of Brittany and Malik standing in the lobby of a luxury hotel holding expensive coffees. Malik was wearing another loud, oversized designer suit, flashing a custom watch at the camera. My parents stood behind them, smiling like royalty. The text beneath the photo was dripping with toxic arrogance. Malik is getting his millions today, the message read. Do not bother crawling back and begging us for money when you finally realize you are a complete failure. You are dead to this family. I stared at the glowing screen as the elevator rushed downward. They were practically tap dancing on a live minefield, utterly convinced they had won the lottery. I felt a cold, deep satisfaction settle into my chest. I did not type out a long, emotional response. I did not try to warn them or defend myself. I simply typed a single calm sentence. I would not miss today for the world. I hit send, locked my phone, and slipped it into my pocket. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the executive floor. The steel doors slid open, revealing the polished marble hallway leading directly to the Apex suite. It was time to burn their artificial empires to the ground. The morning sunlight cut through the towering glass atrium of the Kensington Holdings Global Headquarters. It was a monolith of brushed steel and black marble, a cathedral of absolute financial power, situated right in the most expensive commercial district of the city. The massive revolving doors spun continuously, admitting a steady stream of high-level executives and elite corporate lawyers. And then walking right through the center of the grand lobby, like they owned the very foundation of the building, came my family. I watched the live security feed from the massive digital monitors inside the 75th floor operations center. The high-definition cameras captured every single detail of their arrival. Patricia and Richard strutted across the polished marble floor. My mother wore a heavily branded, ostentatious designer coat that she had undoubtedly purchased on a high-interest credit card she could no longer afford. My father walked with his chest puffed out, a smug, entitled grin plastered across his face. He looked around the lobby with the arrogant appraisal of a man who firmly believed he was about to join the ranks of the global elite. Right beside them walked Malik and my sister Brittany. Malik was wearing yet another loud, poorly tailored suit. This one, a bright crimson that screamed for attention. He checked his bulky, fake gold watch every few seconds, loudly complaining to Brittany about the lack of a private red carpet for VIP investors. Brittany clung to his arm, her makeup thick and aggressive, sneering at the corporate receptionists as if they were absolute peasants. They marched directly to the private executive desk, demanding immediate access to the venture capital suite. Less than 2 minutes later, the revolving doors spun again. Trevor strode into the lobby wearing a dark navy bespoke suit that he had undoubtedly paid for using the massive signing bonus he secured with my stolen identity. Amber was clinging tightly to his side, wearing a sleek, form-fitting cocktail dress that was entirely inappropriate for a morning corporate summit. She was desperately trying to play the role of the wealthy executive wife, constantly touching her hair and looking around to see if anyone was admiring them. Trevor held his head high, flashing a plastic corporate smile at the armed security guards. He was a man utterly convinced that his fraudulent ascension to power was permanently secured. The security detail followed my strict pre-authorized digital commands. They directed both parties into the exact same ultra-exclusive VIP waiting lounge on the 75th floor. The room was a stunning display of corporate intimidation, lined with floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a dizzying panoramic view of the sprawling city. A massive mahogany coffee table sat in the center of the room, flanked by plush white leather sofas. Malik and Trevor spotted each other the exact moment Trevor walked through the heavy frosted glass doors. At first there was a brief flicker of confusion. The arrogant tech executive and the flashy startup fraudster, sizing each other up in the ultimate arena of wealth. Then eager recognition set in. "Well, if it is not the new vice president of strategic marketing," Malik boomed, opening his arms in an exaggerated theatrical greeting. "I heard you finally ditched the dead weight and upgraded your lifestyle." Trevor laughed, a smooth, practiced sound that made my skin crawl from the security monitors where I was watching them. I had to make some aggressive corporate cuts, Malik. Madeline was completely dragging my portfolio down. "I see you are moving up in the world too. Are you here pitching your little app to the lower-level managers?" Malik scoffed aggressively, adjusting his bright crimson lapels. "Lower-level managers, please. I am here to sign my final Series A capital transfer, $10 million straight from the top floor. Kensington Holdings is practically begging to fund my platform." My father Richard stepped forward, patting Malik proudly on the shoulder. "We are about to be a very wealthy family, Trevor. It is a shame you and Madeline could not make it work, but honestly, Amber is a much better fit for our elevated social circle." Amber beamed at the compliment, leaning her head against Trevor's shoulder. "Oh, thank you, Richard. Trevor is just so brilliant. He really deserves a woman who understands high-level corporate strategy, not someone who stares at boring spreadsheets all day. Patricia took a sip of complimentary sparkling water, shaking her head with performative pity. I just wish Madeline had an ounce of your ambition, Trevor. She is currently locked in our unfinished basement, completely hysterical. She has absolutely nothing to her name. No money, no job, no future. She actually thought she could survive without a man to guide her. Brittany laughed, a sharp grating sound that echoed off the thick glass walls. I sent her a photo of us celebrating yesterday. She is probably sitting on that rusty cot right now, crying over her little calculator. It is pathetic, really. But some people are just born to be losers. Malik chuckled, sinking heavily into the pristine white leather sofa and carelessly kicking his feet up onto the mahogany coffee table. Let her rot in the basement. Today is about winners. We are about to walk out of this building with enough cash to buy our own private islands. I might even buy her old house just to tear it down for fun. The room filled with a loud chorus of cruel, arrogant laughter. They fed off each other's delusions, a circle of vultures mutually inflating their egos, utterly blind to the reality that they were standing inside a carefully constructed slaughterhouse. They thought they were completely untouchable. They thought they had successfully buried me in the dirt. The heavy frosted glass doors of the VIP lounge slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. A senior executive assistant stepped into the room. She wore a severe black suit and carried a digital tablet. Her expression was completely devoid of emotion, a blank professional mask of corporate efficiency. Mr. Trevor. Mr. Malik, the assistant said, her crisp voice cutting sharply through their loud laughter. The capital transfer documents and the executive employment contracts have been fully prepared. The ultimate decision maker is ready to finalize your accounts. Malik jumped to his feet, aggressively smoothing his crimson jacket and checking his watch one last time. Trevor quickly buttoned his navy suit, standing tall and puffing out his chest to project maximum dominance. Richard and Patricia exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated greed. Brittany grabbed Malik's arm, her eyes shining with the absolute promise of millions. Amber fixed her posture, ready to strut into the boardroom as the triumphant corporate wife. If you will please follow me to the Apex suite, the assistant instructed, turning on her heel. The executive partner is waiting for you in the boardroom. They strutted out of the VIP lounge, walking shoulder to shoulder down the pristine marble hallway. They marched toward the heavy double oak doors at the end of the corridor, completely convinced they were about to be handed the keys to a global financial empire. They were smiling. They were victorious. And they had absolutely no idea they were walking straight into their own financial execution. The heavy double doors of the Apex suite swung inward with a thick, pressurized sigh, revealing a cavernous boardroom constructed entirely of brushed steel floor-to-ceiling glass and a massive 60-foot mahogany table. The room was designed to project absolute suffocating authority. It was the ultimate financial arena, and my family marched right into the center of it, with their heads held high, completely blinded by their own greed. Trevor stepped over the threshold, first aggressively adjusting the lapels of his bespoke navy suit. Amber clung tightly to his left arm, her inappropriate cocktail dress glittering under the harsh, recessed lighting. Trevor immediately spotted the 6 people seated rigidly along the sides of the long mahogany table. They were all dressed in severe, immaculate black suits. Their posture was aggressively straight, their hands folded neatly over thick black leather binders. Trevor flashed his most charming plastic corporate smile and marched directly toward the nearest man. "Good morning," Trevor announced, projecting his voice to fill the massive room. "I am Trevor, the newly appointed Senior Vice President of Strategic Marketing. I want to thank the board for this initiation ceremony. I am incredibly eager to synergize my operational vision with the executive team." Trevor extended his hand across the table. The man did not take it. He did not even blink. He simply stared at Trevor with cold, dead shark-like eyes. Trevor let his hand hover in the air for a painful, agonizing 5 seconds before awkwardly pulling it back and clearing his throat. He had absolutely no idea that the man he was trying to schmooze was not a marketing executive, but a senior federal agent with the Financial Crimes Division, currently holding a binder filled with Trevor's wire fraud evidence. Malik pushed his way into the room next, his bright crimson suit practically glowing against the sterile corporate background. He completely ignored the heavy, intimidating atmosphere of the room. He strutted past Trevor and slammed his hands down on the polished mahogany table. All right, let us skip the corporate small talk, Malik boomed, flashing his fake gold watch. I was told the ultimate decision maker would be here to execute my $10 million capital transfer. My platform is ready for immediate global scaling. Where do I sign, and more importantly, where is the vintage champagne? I specifically requested a celebration spread. None of the corporate litigators or federal agents uttered a single syllable. The silence in this boardroom was absolute, dense, and physically heavy. It was a psychological pressure cooker, but my family was too consumed by their own arrogance to feel the temperature rising. Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms as she looked around the austere room. This is supposed to be the top floor of a global conglomerate, and they do not even have a hospitality team waiting for us. Malik, when you get your funding, we are hiring our own private catering staff. This sterile aesthetic is incredibly depressing. Patricia and Richard followed closely behind, their eyes wide, as they took in the panoramic view of the city skyline through the massive glass walls. They moved to a row of plush leather spectator chairs against the far wall and sat down, acting like royalty waiting for a coronation. Look at this view, Richard, Patricia whispered loudly, her voice echoing in the quiet room. We need to look into buying a commercial property in this district. Once Malik's funds clear the accounts, we will be operating in an entirely different social stratosphere. The country club is going to be absolutely crawling with jealousy. Amber tugged nervously at Trevor's sleeve, finally sensing the unnatural hostility radiating from the silent professionals seated at the table. Trevor, why is nobody saying anything? She whispered. Trevor puffed out his chest, trying to maintain his fragile facade of control. It is an intimidation tactic, Amber. It is standard for high-level corporate initiations. They are just waiting for the principal partner to address the room. The executive assistant who had escorted them inside stepped backward out of the room. She grabbed the heavy brass handles of the double oak doors and pulled them shut. A loud, definitive mechanical click echoed through the suite as the electronic deadbolts automatically engaged. They were officially locked inside. At the very head of the massive mahogany table sat an enormous high-backed black leather executive chair. The chair was turned completely away from the room, facing out toward the sprawling city below. Trevor and Malik both stared at the back of the chair. They naturally assumed the billionaire owner of the conglomerate, or at least a highly decorated senior managing partner, was sitting there silently judging them. Trevor stepped forward, straightening his posture and pitching his voice to sound as commanding as possible. Sir, we are all present and accounted for. We are ready to proceed with the official initiation and the finalization of the venture capital transfer. I sat perfectly still in that massive leather chair, looking out through the pristine glass at the city below. I listened to Trevor's desperate fawning voice. I listened to Malik shifting his weight impatiently. I heard my mother whispering about her newfound wealth. The very same voices that had mocked me, degraded me, and banished me to a freezing damp basement were now echoing in my domain, begging for the money they had stolen. The physical pain of my surgical wounds was completely gone. I felt nothing but a cold, absolute, and terrifying power surging through my veins. The trap had snapped shut flawlessly. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner of the encrypted Kensington tablet resting in my lap. I placed my feet flat against the polished floor. I pushed gently, and the massive leather chair slowly began to swivel around. The smooth rotation of the chair was the only movement in the entire cavernous room. I brought the chair to a complete stop, sitting dead center at the head of the mahogany table. I was clad in my immaculate razor-sharp white designer suit, my hair pinned back flawlessly, my posture radiating total undeniable dominance. I rested my hands on the table, my fingers interlaced over the glowing tablet, and leveled a cold, deadpan stare directly at the people who had destroyed my life. The reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. The smug, arrogant smile on Trevor's face physically shattered. His jaw went slack, and his eyes bulged as if he were staring at a ghost. The color drained from his face so fast he looked completely bloodless. Malik stumbled backward, his shiny dress shoes slipping against the hardwood floor, a strangled gasp catching in his throat. Amber let out a sharp, terrified squeak, instinctively hiding behind Trevor's shoulder. Patricia and Richard sat frozen in their spectator chairs, their eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated horror, unable to comprehend how the daughter they had locked in a basement was now sitting on the ultimate throne of a global financial empire. The absolute silence in the boardroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. I watched the reality of the situation crash into my family, like a derailed freight train. The smug entitlement that had carried them through the lobby up the elevator and into this ultimate arena of wealth completely evaporated, replaced by a visceral, suffocating panic. Trevor was the first to physically react. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white as his brain desperately tried to process how the woman he had left bleeding in a hospital bed was now sitting at the head of a global conglomerate. His bespoke navy suit suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, strangled wheeze came out. He was choking on his own terror. Malik, however, possessed an ego far too massive to accept defeat quietly. The initial shock wore off, instantly replaced by explosive defensive rage. He slammed his hand against the glass wall, the heavy fake gold watch on his wrist, clanking loudly against the pristine surface. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Malik roared, his voice echoing violently off the brushed steel panels. He spun around, glaring at the 6 silent men seated along the table, entirely unaware that he was shouting at highly trained federal agents. "Security. I want security in here right now. Remove this crazy ex-wife from the building. She is a dumped, unemployed housewife who sneaked in here to ruin my capital transfer. Get her out before I call the police for corporate espionage." Patricia leaped up from her spectator chair, her heavily branded designer coat slipping off her shoulders and pooling on the floor. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Madeline, what are you doing?" Patricia shrieked, marching toward the center of the room. "How did you get past the lobby guards? You are completely ruining our lives. Malik is about to secure $10 million, and you are trying to sabotage your own sister out of pure pathetic jealousy. Get out of that chair instantly before you get us all arrested." Richard puffed out his chest, stepping up beside his wife to play the commanding patriarch one last time. He tried to use the deep, authoritative voice he had used to banish me to the basement just weeks ago. "Madeline, this is a federal offense," he barked, his face flushed with panicked anger. "You are trespassing in a highly restricted corporate suite. You are going to federal prison if you do not walk out that door right now. We are not going to let your mental breakdown destroy this family." Brittany stood frozen next to Malik, her heavy makeup masking a face that had gone entirely pale. She looked at the encrypted tablet under my interlaced fingers, then up at my immaculate white designer suit. She was slowly realizing that I did not look like a woman who had broken into a building. I looked like the woman who owned it. Trevor finally found his voice. It was weak, trembling, and laced with the dawning horror of a man connecting the dots of his own destruction. His eyes darted wildly as the realization set in. The rejected credit cards at the Miami luxury car dealership, the locked offshore accounts, the sudden highly exclusive corporate invitation to his own initiation ceremony. It had not been a banking error. It had been a highly coordinated digital execution. "Madeline," Trevor stammered, sweat beading on his forehead, staining his crisp collar. "What did you do? What did you do to my bank accounts?" Amber whimpered, taking another step backward, until her back hit the frosted glass of the locked doors. She looked like a trapped animal desperately seeking an exit that no longer existed. She clutched her inappropriate cocktail dress, realizing that the wealthy tech executive she had stolen away was rapidly turning into a massive liability. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell back at Malik. I did not justify my presence to my mother. I simply sat there, radiating absolute freezing calm, letting their frantic, desperate shouting bounce off my armor. I watched them flail like drowning rats fighting for a breath of air in a room where I controlled the entire oxygen supply. The federal agents seated along the table remained perfectly still, their hands resting neatly on their black leather binders. They did not flinch at Malik's aggressive shouting. They did not react to Patricia's dramatic demands. They simply waited for my command, a terrifying display of disciplined institutional power that was entirely lost on my arrogant family. I picked up the encrypted Kensington tablet. I looked directly into Malik's furious, arrogant eyes. I moved my thumb over the digital control panel. I pressed a single red button on the screen. A loud, heavy electronic slam echoed through the cavernous suite as the secondary deadbolts engaged on the double oak doors. The sound was definitive. It was the sound of a steel vault locking shut. Amber jumped, letting out a sharp cry as the door handles behind her locked rigidly into place. "Nobody is calling security," I said. My voice was quiet, but it sliced through the room with the lethal precision of a scalpel. "And nobody is leaving this room." Malik lunged forward, slamming both hands onto the mahogany table directly across from me. "You do not give the orders here, you pathetic failure." He spat, his face twisted with unearned superiority. "I am here to meet the ultimate decision-maker of Kensington Holdings. I am here to sign my term sheet." I reached down to the floor beside my executive chair. I picked up the two massive black leather forensic audit binders I had meticulously compiled on the 75th floor. I lifted them up and dropped them onto the center of the polished mahogany table. The heavy binders hit the solid wood with a thunderous, terrifying crash that made Patricia physically flinch and take a step backward. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table, fixing them with a stare of absolute, merciless authority. "I am the executive partner of Kensington Holdings," I stated, my voice ringing with total, undeniable power. "And I am here to execute the audits on your pathetic, fraudulent lives." The heavy silence that followed my declaration was absolute. The air in the boardroom grew so thin it felt as though every drop of oxygen had been sucked into the air conditioning vents. Trevor stood paralyzed, his hands still gripping the edge of the mahogany table. His pristine corporate mask had completely melted away, leaving behind the terrified, sweaty face of a cornered thief. I did not give them a single second to recover. I swiped my finger across the encrypted Kensington tablet. Instantly, the massive panoramic glass wall behind me turned an opaque frosted white. A hidden projector hummed to life from the ceiling, casting a brilliantly crisp, high-definition display directly onto the glass. "Trevor," I said, my voice perfectly level and devoid of any human warmth, "we will start with the newly appointed Senior Vice President of Strategic Marketing. Please take a seat. We have a lot of financial terrain to cover, and you look like you might pass out." He collapsed heavily into the leather chair, his legs physically giving out beneath him. Amber whimpered, clutching the fabric of his sleeve, her eyes darting between the armed federal agents and the massive projection screen. I tapped the screen of my tablet. A highly detailed, interconnected web of bank statements, wire transfers, and corporate routing numbers illuminated the frosted glass. 5 weeks ago, I began pointing a laser pointer at the top left corner of the projection. While I was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a cesarean section, you forged my signature on a power of attorney. You sold the house I paid for, but you did not stop there. You leveraged my immaculate 10-year credit history to secure a commercial business loan in the amount of $500,000. You drained our joint accounts and left me with a 5-day-old infant on a concrete curb, completely destitute. Patricia gasped from her spectator chair, but a sharp look from one of the federal agents kept her glued to her seat. Trevor swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "Madeline, please," he rasped, his voice cracking. "You are taking this out of context. I was making a corporate investment for our future." I laughed, a short, sharp sound that echoed off the steel walls. "An investment for our future," I repeated. "You are a terrible liar, Trevor, and a significantly worse criminal." I pressed the tablet again. The screen zoomed in on a specific red line tracing across the digital map. "You wired the $500,000 into a Delaware shell company, then split it between 2 Wyoming dummy corporations. To hide the paper trail," I explained, forcing him to watch his entire criminal architecture unfold on the massive screen. From there, the funds merged back together and were deposited directly into an offshore Cayman Islands trust. I clicked the final slide. A high-resolution photograph of an executive employment contract appeared next to a bank ledger. "That Cayman Trust belongs to Gregory Thorne, the Senior Executive Vice President of Talent Acquisition for this very technology firm," I stated. "You did not invest in anything. You paid a massive, untraceable $500,000 bribe to buy your way into an elite executive title. You purchased your corporate crown using a fraudulent commercial loan guaranteed entirely by my stolen identity." Trevor buried his face in his hands. He was physically shaking, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "But the absolute best part of your miserable financial strategy," I continued, turning my attention to the terrified woman cowering beside him, "is who you chose as your accomplice." I tapped the tablet one last time. The screen flashed to a series of banking authorization forms for the Wyoming dummy corporations. The authorized signatory name was highlighted in bright glowing yellow. "Amber," I said, addressing her directly. Did you really think you could run off to Miami and play the wealthy executive wife without leaving a digital footprint? Trevor used your personal information to establish the routing accounts. Your name is on the federal wire transfers. Amber let out a sharp, horrified gasp. She dropped Trevor's arm as if he had suddenly caught fire. What are you talking about? She shrieked, her voice echoing wildly in the sterile room. I did not sign anything. Trevor told me he was moving his personal investments. I did not know it was stolen money. Ignorance is not a valid defense in federal court, Amber, I replied coldly. By allowing him to use your name on those offshore accounts, you became a willing participant in a massive interstate money laundering and wire fraud conspiracy. I reached into the inside pocket of my white designer suit. I pulled out a sleek black legal folder bearing the official crest of Kensington Holdings. I tossed it across the polished mahogany table. It slid with a smooth, lethal hiss, stopping exactly inches from Trevor's trembling hands. Open it, I commanded. Trevor reached out with shaking fingers. He flipped open the black cover. Sitting on top was a formal immediate termination of employment stamped and signed by the Kensington Human Resources Division. Beneath it lay a thick, heavily stamped document from the United States Department of Justice. It was a federal subpoena. You are not a vice president, Trevor, I said, looking down at him with absolute, unadulterated disgust. You are a felon. Your offshore accounts are permanently frozen. Your stolen sports car has already been repossessed. You have absolutely nothing. Amber let out a guttural, furious scream. She spun around and slapped Trevor across the face with such violent force that the sound cracked through the room like a whip. Trevor recoiled, holding his reddened cheek, too stunned to even defend himself. You ruined my life, Amber shrieked, hitting his chest with her fists. You told me we were rich. You told me you were a genius. You dragged me into a federal crime. She turned on her heels, her inappropriate cocktail dress swishing around her legs, and bolted toward the heavy double oak doors. She grabbed the brass handles violently, yanking them, desperate to escape the slaughterhouse. The locked deadbolts did not budge a single millimeter. Two federal agents stood up from the mahogany table, their movements synchronized and terrifyingly calm. They stepped directly in front of the frosted glass doors, physically blocking Amber's only path of retreat. One of the agents reached to his belt, unhooking a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Please take a seat, ma'am, the agent instructed, his voice low and utterly devoid of sympathy. The United States government is not finished with you yet. Amber collapsed against the locked doors, sliding down to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Trevor sat frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the federal subpoena that had just ended his life. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I simply picked up my tablet, turned my cold gaze away from the shattered remnants of my marriage, and locked eyes directly on Malik. I was only halfway done. I turned my attention to the opposite side of the 60-foot mahogany table. Malik was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. His bright crimson suit, which had seemed so bold in the lobby, now looked like a neon target. He swallowed hard, his chest heaving under his tight collar, but the monumental arrogance that defined his entire existence refused to let him surrender quietly. He had watched Trevor get financially and professionally executed in less than 3 minutes, yet his inflated ego somehow convinced him he was immune to the same destruction. Look, whatever domestic dispute you have with that guy is your business, Malik said, pointing a shaking finger at Trevor, who was still slumped in his chair. But do not try to lump me into this. I am running a legitimate technology enterprise. My algorithms are proprietary. The board already approved my funding. You cannot touch me. I swiped 2 fingers across the encrypted Kensington tablet. The massive frosted glass wall behind me flickered. Trevor's offshore bank statements vanished instantly, replaced by lines of glowing green code and highly complex financial flowcharts. Proprietary algorithms, I repeated, my voice dripping with absolute surgical precision. You are referring to the revolutionary artificial intelligence platform you pitched to our venture capital division. The software that was supposed to disrupt the global market and secure your $10 million valuation. I tapped the screen, highlighting a specific block of text in bright red. I ran a basic comparative forensic analysis on your source code, I stated. You did not write a single line of this architecture. You literally copied an open-source template from a free public developer forum. You did not even bother to remove the original creator's copyright notes buried in the back-end directory. Your groundbreaking software is a hollow digital shell. Brittany slammed her hands down on the mahogany table. Her diamond necklace rattled against her collarbone. "You are lying!" she shrieked, her voice shrill and grating. "Malik is a genius. You are just making things up because you are a miserable, dumped loser who cannot stand to see me becoming a billionaire. You have always been jealous of me." I did not raise my voice. I did not even blink at her outburst. "Sit down, Brittany," I commanded with freezing authority. "You are about to find out exactly how your husband pays for those designer bags." I zoomed in on the right side of the projection. The screen filled with hundreds of rapid-fire banking transactions. The fake software was just a glossy front to justify sudden influxes of cash, I explained, forcing them to look at the undeniable data. "Your real business model is a textbook smurfing operation. Over the last 8 months, your shell company has been receiving massive undocumented capital injections from an anonymous syndicate based in the Caribbean. You funneled that dirty cash into domestic accounts by breaking the deposits down into $9,900 increments, deliberately staying just below the federal reporting threshold to avoid triggering an automatic audit." Malik took a step back, bumping hard into his leather executive chair. Sweat poured down his forehead, soaking into his collar. "Those are angel investors," he stammered, holding up his hands in a frantic defensive gesture. "This is standard venture capital structuring. I am securing bridge funding. There is absolutely nothing standard about violating the Bank Secrecy Act and Title 18 of the United States Code." I fired back, pulling the second black leather binder toward me. "You are not a tech visionary, Malik. You are a low-level money mule. You used my parents' suburban house as a physical staging ground to launder millions of dollars of illicit offshore money. You thought you were outsmarting the system, but you walked right into an investment subsidiary owned by Kensington Holdings, practically begging us to inject clean capital to legitimize your cartel cash." Malik shook his head violently. "No, no, you cannot prove that. You hacked those files. This is corporate espionage." I opened the heavy black binder. I bypassed the financial spreadsheets and pulled out a single thick sheet of heavy stock paper. It bore the unmistakable, terrifying seal of the United States Department of Justice. I placed it flat on the table, staring Malik dead in the eyes. "You aren't getting $10 million, I said coldly. "You're getting 10 years in a federal penitentiary." The timing was immaculate. The two men seated to Malik's left, the individuals he had tried to schmooze upon entering the room, stood up in perfect, terrifying unison. They did not read him his rights like local beat cops. They moved with the silent, tactical efficiency of seasoned federal agents who had just been handed a pristine, undeniable case file. One agent grabbed Malik's right arm, twisting it forcefully behind his back. Malik let out a sharp yelp of pain as his chest was slammed hard against the polished mahogany table. His fake gold watch scraped violently across the wood. The sharp, heavy metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed through the silent boardroom, sealing his fate with absolute finality. "No, wait, I am a CEO!" Malik shouted, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine as the agents locked his wrists together. "I have investors. You cannot do this to me." Brittany let out a blood-curdling, hysterical shriek. The reality of her shattered elite lifestyle hit her all at once. "Get your hands off my husband!" she screamed, lunging toward the federal agents with her manicured claws extended. A third agent simply stepped into her path, holding up a single firm hand that stopped her dead in her tracks. The look in his eyes promised immediate arrest if she took another step. Brittany spun around, her face streaked with tears and ruined makeup. She looked frantically toward the spectator chairs against the far wall. "Mom, Dad," she wailed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated panic. "Do something! They are taking him! Tell them to stop!" But Patricia and Richard were not moving. They were sitting completely paralyzed in their plush leather chairs, their mouths hanging open in stunned, breathless horror as they watched their golden child's artificial empire burn to the ground right in front of them. The billionaire future they had banked everything on was currently being hauled out of the room in federal chains. I sat perfectly still at the head of the table, my posture immaculate. Trevor was destroyed. Malik was in custody. But I was not finished yet. I slowly turned my gaze away from my hysterical sister and locked eyes directly with my parents. The final bill was officially due. The silence in the boardroom shattered the moment the federal agents pulled Malik up by his arms. The sharp metallic clinking of the handcuffs seemed to echo off the glass walls, acting as the final undeniable catalyst that broke my parents completely. The illusion of their elite suburban supremacy dissolved right in front of my eyes. Patricia took a staggering step forward, her legs tangling in the heavy fabric of her discarded designer coat. Her knees buckled beneath her. She hit the polished hardwood floor with a heavy, ungraceful thud. All her manicured elegance, all her manufactured country club superiority vanished in an instant. She crawled toward the edge of the massive mahogany table, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup in dark, ugly streaks. "Madeline, please!" Patricia wailed, her voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate sob. "You have to stop them. Tell the agents to stop. We are your family. You cannot do this to us." Richard dropped to his knees right beside her. The commanding, arrogant patriarch who had banished me to the shadows was now a trembling, broken old man. He reached out, grabbing the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping him from falling into an abyss. "You have the power to fix this," Richard begged, his face flushed with absolute terror. "You control the venture fund. You can release the capital. If the government seizes Malik's accounts, we have absolutely no way to pay back the second mortgage. You have to give us the money to save the house, Madeline. You are an executive partner now. You have millions at your disposal. You cannot let them take our home." Brittany collapsed next to them, clutching her chest, hyperventilating as the federal agents firmly guided her handcuffed husband toward the frosted glass doors. She looked at me with wild, frantic eyes, no longer the arrogant golden child, but a terrified accessory to a massive federal crime. I looked down at the three of them groveling on the floor. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no remorse, no lingering desire for their approval. The abused, desperate daughter who had craved their love was completely dead, entirely replaced by the cold, calculating executioner sitting in the leather chair. I picked up my encrypted tablet and stared down at them with absolute zero empathy. "You mortgaged your home to fund a criminal," I stated, my voice slicing through their pathetic weeping with the lethal precision of a blade. "The bank is foreclosing tomorrow. You put a bleeding mother and your own grandson in a freezing basement. Enjoy the streets." Patricia let out a blood-curdling scream of pure, absolute devastation. She slammed her hands against the hardwood floor, finally realizing that there was no secret lifeline, no sudden act of maternal forgiveness. The vault was closed, and she was locked outside in the cold. Richard buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with heavy, defeated sobs. They had gambled their entire existence on a flashy, arrogant fraud, and they had lost everything. I pressed the digital control panel on my tablet one final time. The heavy electronic deadbolts on the double oak doors disengaged with a loud mechanical clack. "Take them out," I commanded the federal agents. The boardroom doors swung open. The agents hauled Malik forward. He was no longer shouting about his non-existent technology empire or his imaginary billionaire investors. His oversized, bright crimson suit hung awkwardly on his frame as they physically dragged him out of the room. He kept his head down, utterly humiliated as the reality of a decade in a federal penitentiary crashed down upon him. Trevor was next. Two separate agents hauled my ex-husband out of his leather chair. His legs were shaking so violently he could barely stand on his own. The pristine navy suit he had bought with my stolen money was wrinkled and stained with his own sweat. He looked back at me one last time as they guided him toward the exit. His eyes were wide, filled with the devastating recognition that he had thrown away a loyal wife for a counterfeit crown, and it had cost him his entire life. The agents pushed him through the doorway, marching him out into the marble hallway to face the cameras and the consequences. Amber was already gone, having been escorted out the moment the doors unlocked, her desperate attempts to distance herself from Trevor, completely useless against the federal wire fraud charges waiting for her. I sat at the head of the 60-foot mahogany table for a few seconds longer, absorbing the profound silence that settled over the room. My family remained on the floor, a tangled, sobbing mess of ruined pride and shattered delusions. They had absolutely nothing left to say. They had no leverage, no money, and no future. Their artificial kingdom was officially a graveyard. I did not offer them a single word of comfort. I did not deliver a final emotional speech. They were simply no longer worth my oxygen. I picked up the black forensic audit binders, grabbed my encrypted tablet, and stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my immaculate white designer suit and turned my back on them. I walked with perfectly measured, confident strides toward the open boardroom doors. I did not look back, not even once. I stepped into the private executive elevator and swiped the solid gold biometric keycard. The doors glided shut, sealing away the wreckage of my past. The rapid descent to the ground floor felt incredibly light, as if a massive, suffocating weight had finally been lifted from my chest. I walked across the cavernous, sunlit expanse of the Kensington Holdings lobby. The armed security guards nodded respectfully as I passed. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped out into the crisp, bracing city air. The morning sun was brilliant, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. Waiting for me at the curb was the massive, bulletproof black limousine. Standing right beside the open door was the highly trained private nanny Theodore Kensington had provided. She smiled warmly, holding a bundled, perfectly content Leo in her arms. I handed my binders to the driver and reached out, taking my son into my arms. I held him close to my chest, feeling his tiny, steady heartbeat against my own. We were safe. We were secure. We were entirely untouchable. I stepped into the quiet, luxurious interior of the waiting limousine. The driver closed the heavy, armored door with a solid, pressurized seal. The engine rumbled to life, smooth and incredibly powerful. The vehicle pulled seamlessly into the flowing city traffic, carrying me toward a future built entirely on my own terms. There was no forgiveness. There was no looking back. There was just absolute triumphant power. The greatest lesson I learned is that true security never comes from those who claim to love you, but from your own unwavering resilience. When my husband and family stripped away my home and dignity, they expected me to crumble. Instead, their betrayal became the exact catalyst I needed to realize my own lethal worth. You cannot control how others treat you, but you possess the absolute power to dictate the consequences. Never apologize for protecting yourself and burning down toxic bridges. Have you ever walked away from toxic relatives to discover your strength? Share your experiences in the comments below and hit like and subscribe for more stories.